The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus Chen adjusted his black belt for the third time. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. After 15 years of martial arts training, countless competitions, and a wall full of trophies, he finally had his chance to prove himself against the legendary Royal Guard. Marcus had heard the stories since childhood. The Royal Guard were said to be the most elite fighters in the kingdom, trained from youth in ancient combat techniques passed down through generations. They protected the royal family with their lives, and their skill was the stuff of legends. But Marcus had always wondered if the stories were true, or just exaggerated tales meant to inspire fear and respect. The opportunity came unexpectedly. During a public ceremony 3 weeks ago, the Queen had announced a new tradition. Any citizen with proven martial arts credentials could request a demonstration match with a member of the Royal Guard. It was meant to showcase the kingdom's commitment to martial excellence and give talented fighters a chance to learn from the best. Marcus didn't hesitate. He submitted his application the very next day, along with videos of his tournament victories and letters of recommendation from his instructors. His specialty was mixed martial arts, combining elements of karate, jiu-jitsu, and boxing. He was 28 years old, at the peak of his physical condition, and hungry to test his skills against the ultimate challenge. The palace had approved his request within a week. The match would take place in the main courtyard, open to public viewing. Word spread quickly through the city, and Marcus found himself the center of attention wherever he went. Some people praised his courage, while others questioned his sanity. The Royal Guard had never lost a public demonstration. Now, as Marcus stretched and warmed up in the designated area, he could see crowds gathering behind the ornate barriers that surrounded the fighting space. Nobles in fine clothes mixed with common citizens, all eager to witness what many expected would be a swift and decisive victory for the Royal Guard. The betting houses had given Marcus odds of 50-1 against him. A herald approached Marcus, dressed in the traditional blue and gold uniform of the palace staff. "Mr. Chen," the man said formally, "His Royal Majesty and the Queen will be observing from the royal balcony. The demonstration will begin in 10 minutes. Are you prepared?" Marcus nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "I'm ready." The herald gestured toward the opposite side of the courtyard. "Your opponent approaches now." Marcus turned to see a figure walking slowly across the stone floor. The Royal Guard member wore simple training clothes, white pants and a plain shirt, rather than the elaborate ceremonial armor Marcus had expected. The guard appeared to be in his 40s, with graying hair and a lean build. He moved with an easy, relaxed gait that seemed almost casual. This surprised Marcus. He had expected someone younger, more physically imposing. The guard looked more like a scholar than a warrior. Perhaps the stories about the Royal Guard were exaggerated after all. Marcus felt his confidence growing as he studied his opponent's unremarkable appearance. The crowd's murmur grew louder as the guard approached. Marcus could hear fragments of conversation from the spectators. Some seemed surprised by the guard's ordinary appearance, while others whispered knowingly about his identity. Apparently, this was Guard Captain William Sterling, a 30-year veteran of the Royal Guard and instructor to the younger members. Captain Sterling stopped about 10 feet from Marcus and offered a respectful bow. Marcus returned the gesture, noting that the older man's movements were precise and controlled, despite their apparent casualness. Sterling's eyes were calm and alert, studying Marcus with the same careful attention Marcus was giving him. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Chen," Sterling said in a quiet voice. "I've watched recordings of several of your tournament fights. You have impressive technique and determination." The compliment caught Marcus off guard. He had expected coldness or arrogance from the elite guard, not genuine respect. "Thank you, Captain Sterling. I'm grateful for this opportunity." Sterling smiled slightly. "The pleasure is mine. It's been some time since I faced someone with your particular combination of skills." I expect to learn something from our encounter. Today. This humble response only reinforced Marcus's growing belief that he might actually have a chance. The captain seemed almost too polite, too respectful. Where was the legendary confidence and intimidating presence he had expected from a royal guard? The herald stepped forward and began announcing the rules to the crowd. The match would consist of 3 rounds, each lasting 5 minutes. Victory could be achieved through submission, knockout, or judge's decision based on technique and control. All strikes and grappling techniques were permitted, but excessive force was prohibited since this was a demonstration rather than a true combat situation. As the herald spoke, Marcus noticed something subtle about Captain Sterling's posture. Though the older man appeared relaxed and casual, his feet were positioned in a perfect fighting stance. His hands hung naturally at his sides, but Marcus could see they were ready to move instantly in any direction. The captain's breathing was slow and controlled, and his gaze never left Marcus's center of mass. The realization struck Marcus like a cold wave. This wasn't casualness at all. It was complete mastery. Sterling wasn't tense because he didn't need to be. Every muscle, every breath, every tiny shift in position was under perfect control. This was what true expertise looked like. The herald finished his announcement and stepped back. "Fighters, take your positions!" Marcus moved to his mark, suddenly, very aware of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The crowd fell silent. Hundreds of eyes focused on the 2 men in the center of the courtyard. From the royal balcony, he could see the king and queen leaning forward with interest. Captain Sterling simply stood where he was, making no obvious preparation for combat. His expression remained calm and friendly, as if he were about to have a pleasant conversation rather than engage in martial combat. This only made Marcus more nervous. He had faced aggressive opponents, angry opponents, even arrogant opponents. But this quiet confidence was something entirely new. The herald raised his hand. "Begin." Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to test 15 years of training against the legend of the Royal Guard. Marcus exploded forward with a combination he had perfected in countless training sessions. A quick jab followed by a low kick, then a spinning elbow strike. The sequence had earned him victory in 3 different tournaments, catching opponents off guard with its speed and precision. Captain Sterling simply wasn't there. The older man had moved with such fluid grace that Marcus almost didn't see it happen. One moment, Sterling was directly in front of him. The next, he was 2 steps to the left, watching Marcus's attacks pass harmlessly through empty air. Sterling's expression hadn't changed at all. He still wore that same calm, almost friendly look. Marcus quickly recovered and reset his stance. The crowd murmured with surprise. They had expected the young fighter to at least make contact in his opening assault. Instead, he had been completely avoided, without Sterling even appearing to hurry. Determined not to be embarrassed, Marcus tried a different approach. He feinted left, then drove forward with a powerful right cross aimed at Sterling's chest. This time, instead of moving away, the captain simply lifted his hand and deflected the punch with what seemed like no effort at all. The redirect sent Marcus stumbling slightly to one side. Before Marcus could recover his balance, he felt Sterling's hand on his shoulder, not grabbing or striking, just resting there gently. The touch was so light it was almost friendly, but it completely disrupted Marcus's attempt to regain his footing. He found himself spinning in a half circle, ending up with his back to the captain. The crowd gasped. In any real fight, this would have been the end. Sterling could have struck him anywhere, or applied a chokehold, or simply pushed him to the ground. Instead, the captain stepped back and waited patiently for Marcus to turn around and face him again. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. He was being toyed with, handled like a child who thought he could fight adults. The realization stung his pride, but it also focused his mind. He had trained too long and worked too hard to be dismissed so easily. This time, Marcus approached, more cautiously. He threw a series of probing strikes, Not committed attacks, but quick jabs and kicks designed to test Sterling's reactions and find openings. Each strike was met with minimal, precise movements that redirected or avoided the attacks without wasted motion. What amazed Marcus was how little effort Sterling seemed to be using. The captain never looked strained or hurried. His breathing remained steady and calm. He moved like water, flowing around Marcus's attacks rather than blocking or countering them forcefully. It was beautiful to watch, even for Marcus, who was growing increasingly frustrated. 5 minutes into the first round, Marcus had landed exactly 0 strikes. He had thrown dozens of punches and kicks, each one technically sound and delivered, with proper form, but none had made contact with their intended target. Meanwhile, Sterling had barely seemed to move at all, simply shifting his weight and adjusting his position with tiny, economical movements. The crowd had grown completely silent. What they were witnessing was beyond their expectations. Most had come to see either a quick victory by the Royal Guard or perhaps a competitive match between 2 skilled fighters. Instead, they were watching something that looked almost like a dance, with one partner completely controlling the rhythm and flow. Marcus tried to change tactics again. He shot forward for a takedown, attempting to grab Sterling's legs and bring the fight to the ground where his grappling skills might prove more effective. For the first time, Sterling moved quickly, but even his speed was controlled and graceful. He simply stepped back and to the side, allowing Marcus to dive past him and hit the stone floor alone. As Marcus rolled and got back to his feet, he saw something that made his heart sink. Sterling was still in exactly the same relaxed stance he had started with. His hands hung naturally at his sides. His feet were positioned casually. Even his facial expression hadn't changed. He still looked like a polite instructor observing. A student's technique. The herald called time on the first round. Marcus walked to his corner, breathing heavily despite having barely made contact with his opponent. He grabbed a towel and water bottle, trying to process what had just happened. In 15 years of fighting, he had never encountered anything like this. His corner man, an old boxing trainer named Eddie, leaned in close. "Kid, I don't know what to tell you. It's like he's not even fighting. He's just there." Marcus nodded, still catching his breath. "He's not even trying, Eddie. He's playing with me, maybe," Eddie said thoughtfully. "Or maybe he's showing you something. Watch his feet in the next round. I don't think he's moved more than 3 steps in any direction." Marcus looked across the courtyard at Sterling, who was standing quietly in his corner. The captain wasn't drinking water or toweling off sweat. He wasn't even breathing hard. He simply stood there, occasionally nodding to acknowledge the respectful bows of various nobles and officials who approached to speak with him. The second round began with Marcus, trying a completely different strategy. Instead of rushing forward, he stayed back and tried to draw Sterling into attacking. He moved in a circle around the older man, throwing occasional kicks and punches from long range, hoping to force some kind of aggressive response. Sterling simply turned slowly to keep facing Marcus, never pursuing, never retreating. His movements were so economical that he seemed to be conserving energy for something, though Marcus couldn't imagine what. When Marcus threw strikes from a distance, Sterling would sometimes make tiny adjustments to avoid them, or simply let them fall short of their target. Halfway through the second round, Marcus realized something that chilled him. Sterling wasn't just avoiding his attacks. He was controlling the entire fight. Every time Marcus moved, Sterling's subtle positioning determined where he could go next. Every attack Marcus attempted was being guided into safe directions by Sterling's minimal responses. Marcus was fighting himself, and Sterling was merely directing the dance. The crowd began to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't a competition between 2 fighters. This was a masterclass in martial arts being conducted by someone who operated on a completely different level. Whispers began spreading through the spectators as they pointed out details they were noticing. "Look, he's not even sweating. Did you see that? He moved his hand 2 inches and completely changed the young man's attack. My grandfather told stories about fighters like this, but I never believed them. Marcus heard fragments of the crowd's commentary, and it only made his situation worse. He was being humiliated in front of hundreds of people, including royalty. His reputation as a skilled fighter was evaporating with each passing minute. Desperate now, Marcus launched his most aggressive assault yet. He threw everything he had learned: boxing combinations, karate strikes, jiu-jitsu attempts, even some techniques from weapons training adapted for empty hands. For 30 seconds, he unleashed a whirlwind of attacks that would have overwhelmed any opponent he had ever faced. Sterling moved through the storm like it was a gentle breeze. Not hurried, not strained, just flowing from position to position, with perfect timing. Each of Marcus's strikes missed by exactly the smallest margin necessary. It was as if Sterling knew where every attack was going before Marcus had even decided to throw it. When Marcus finally exhausted himself and stepped back, gasping for air, Sterling was still standing in the same relaxed posture. He hadn't even displaced his hair. The second round ended with the same result as the first. No contact, no apparent effort from Sterling, and Marcus growing more frustrated and tired with each passing minute. Between the second and third rounds, Marcus sat heavily on the small stool in his corner. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, and sweat dripped steadily from his forehead onto the stone floor. Across the courtyard, Captain Sterling stood calmly, his breathing as steady as when the match had begun. Eddie, his corner man, wiped Marcus's face with a towel and spoke in urgent, quiet tones. "Listen to me, son. You're fighting the wrong fight. You're trying to hit him, and that's not going to work. Look at what he's doing." Marcus shook his head, frustrated. "What do you mean? He's not doing anything, that's the problem." "Exactly," Eddie said, leaning closer. "He's not doing anything because he doesn't need to. You're doing all the work, and he's just guiding where it goes. Stop trying to attack him and start trying to understand him." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the herald called for the final round. Marcus stood up, his legs feeling heavier than they had at the start of the match. He had thrown hundreds of techniques in the past 10 minutes and hadn't accomplished anything except exhausting himself. As he walked to the center of the courtyard, Marcus made a decision. He would spend this round not trying to win, but trying to learn. If he was going to be defeated anyway, he might as well understand how it was happening. The third round began, but this time Marcus moved differently. Instead of launching immediate attacks, he watched Sterling carefully. He threw a slow, deliberate punch, paying attention not to whether it would land, but to how Sterling responded. What he saw amazed him. Sterling's avoidance wasn't random or instinctive. It was precise and calculated. The captain moved exactly as much as necessary, and no more. When Marcus threw a punch that would miss by 6 inches, Sterling didn't move at all. When a kick came, within 2 inches, Sterling made the smallest possible adjustment to avoid it. This meant Sterling could see exactly where every attack was going before it arrived. More than that, he was using Marcus's own momentum and intentions to control the fight. When Marcus leaned forward to punch, Sterling would shift slightly, causing Marcus to overextend. When Marcus tried to retreat, Sterling's positioning would guide him into awkward angles. For the first time since the match began, Marcus smiled. He was still losing badly, but at least now he understood what was happening to him. This wasn't just superior skill. It was a completely different way of thinking about combat. Marcus began experimenting. He threw a high kick, but instead of trying to make it powerful, he focused on watching Sterling's response. The captain simply swayed backward, letting the kick pass inches in front of his face. But Marcus noticed something new. Sterling's eyes never followed the kick. They remained focused on Marcus's center of balance. That was the key. Sterling wasn't watching Marcus's hands and feet. He was reading his entire body. Every attack telegraphed itself through tiny shifts in posture, weight distribution, and muscle tension. Sterling was seeing the punches and kicks before Marcus had even decided to throw them. Understanding this, Marcus tried something different. He began moving without any intention to attack, just shifting his weight and changing angles. For the first time, he saw Sterling react with uncertainty. The captain's movements became slightly less smooth, less perfectly timed. The crowd noticed the change, too. Marcus wasn't landing any strikes, but the dynamic of the fight had shifted subtly. He was no longer being completely controlled. He was creating small moments where Sterling had to guess rather than simply know. Encouraged, Marcus pressed this advantage. He started mixing genuine attacks with feints and movement that had no purpose except to obscure his intentions. Sterling adapted quickly, but for brief moments, Marcus could see the older man having to work slightly harder to maintain his perfect positioning. Then Sterling did something that changed everything. Instead of just avoiding Marcus's next punch, the captain stepped forward and gently placed his hand on Marcus's wrist as the strike passed by. It wasn't a block or a grab, just a light touch that lasted for perhaps half a second. But in that brief contact, Marcus felt something extraordinary. It was as if Sterling's hand had communicated directly with his nervous system. Marcus suddenly knew, with absolute certainty, that Sterling could have ended the fight at any moment during the previous 10 minutes. Not just ended it, but ended it in any way he chose. The gentle touch on his wrist contained more power and control than Marcus had ever felt from any opponent. It was like being touched by a mountain, utterly immovable, completely in control, and containing vast reserves of strength that weren't being used. Marcus stepped back, his eyes wide with realization. Sterling simply nodded, as if he had wanted Marcus to understand exactly that. "You feel it now," Sterling said quietly, speaking for the first time since the match began. His voice was calm and conversational, despite the fact that they were in the middle of combat. The difference between fighting and understanding. Marcus found himself nodding in response. The crowd had fallen completely silent, sensing that something significant was happening, even if they couldn't understand what it was. "Your techniques are excellent," Sterling continued, maintaining his ready stance, but no longer seeming like a fighter. He looked more like a teacher now. "Your conditioning is superb, your dedication is obvious, but you're still thinking of this as a battle between two people." Sterling gestured slightly with one hand, a movement so subtle that only Marcus could see it. True mastery begins when you stop fighting your opponent and start working with the forces that already exist. Gravity, momentum, balance, timing, these things don't take sides. They simply are. Marcus threw a slow, experimental jab. Sterling moved with it rather than away from it, redirecting the strike so smoothly that Marcus found himself punching in a completely different direction without realizing how it had happened. "You're trying to impose your will on the situation," Sterling explained as he guided Marcus's next attack into empty air. "But the situation already has its own nature. Work with that nature instead of against it." The final minute of the round became something unprecedented in the history of royal guard demonstrations. Instead of a fight, it became a lesson. Sterling began showing Marcus tiny adjustments to his technique, correcting his balance and timing through gentle physical guidance. When Marcus threw a kick, Sterling would lightly touch his supporting leg, showing him how a slightly different stance would make the technique more stable. When Marcus attempted a combination, Sterling would guide his movements to show him how the attacks could flow more naturally into each other. The crowd watched in fascination as the demonstration transformed into something none of them had expected. They had come to see a fight, but instead they were witnessing a master craftsman sharing his knowledge with a dedicated student. As the final seconds ticked away, Marcus realized he had learned more about martial arts in the past few minutes than in months of regular training. His understanding of balance, timing, and the relationship between opponents had been fundamentally changed. The herald called time, ending the third round and the demonstration. Marcus bowed deeply to Sterling, who returned the gesture with obvious respect. The courtyard remained silent for several long moments after the herald's call. No one seemed quite sure how to react to what they had just witnessed. This hadn't been the decisive victory they expected, nor had it been the competitive match some had hoped for. Instead, they had seen something entirely unique, a demonstration that had evolved into a teaching moment. King Edmund rose from his seat on the royal balcony, his movement causing a ripple of attention throughout the crowd. His expression was thoughtful as he looked down at the two men in the center of the courtyard. Beside him, Queen Isabella leaned forward with obvious interest, her eyes fixed on Captain Sterling. "That was unexpected," the king said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Captain Sterling, would you care to explain what we've just observed?" Sterling bowed toward the royal balcony before responding. "Your Majesty, Mr. Chen presented me with an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the principles we try to instill in the Royal Guard. His skill and determination made it possible to show the difference between fighting and true martial understanding." Marcus felt his cheeks burn. He had been thoroughly outclassed, and now Sterling was being diplomatic about it in front of the entire court. He expected to feel humiliated, but instead he found himself oddly grateful. The captain could have ended the demonstration quickly and decisively, making Marcus look foolish. Instead, he had turned it into something educational. The Queen spoke next, her voice clear and authoritative. "Mr. Chen, you requested this demonstration to test your skills against the Royal Guard. What is your assessment now?" All eyes turned to Marcus. He could feel the weight of hundreds of gazes waiting for his response. His first instinct was to make excuses, to explain that he hadn't been at his best, or that the captain's style was unusual. But as he looked at Sterling's calm, respectful face, Marcus realized this was an opportunity for honesty that might be more valuable than any victory. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, his voice stronger than he felt, "I came here believing I understood martial arts. I thought skill meant being faster, stronger, or more aggressive than my opponent. Captain Sterling has shown me that I was only seeing a small part of the picture." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The crowd waited patiently. "I never landed a single strike," Marcus continued, "but I learned more in these 15 minutes than in months of regular training. The captain didn't defeat me. He taught me, and I think that might be more valuable than any victory I could have achieved." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Several nobles nodded approvingly at Marcus's gracious response. The king smiled slightly, seeming pleased with the young man's honesty and maturity. Sterling stepped forward. "If I may, Your Majesty, Mr. Chen's willingness to learn and adapt during our demonstration was remarkable. Many skilled fighters become rigid when their techniques don't work as expected. Mr. Chen recognized what was happening and adjusted his approach. That shows the kind of mental flexibility that separates good martial artists from great ones." The unexpected praise caused Marcus to stand a little straighter. Coming from someone who had just dominated him so completely, the compliment felt genuine and meaningful. An elderly man in expensive robes stepped forward from the crowd. Marcus recognized him as Lord Chancellor Westbrook, one of the king's most trusted advisors. The old man had been a warrior in his youth and was known to appreciate martial skill. "Captain Sterling," the chancellor said, "forgive my curiosity, but I've never seen anything quite like what we just witnessed. Could you elaborate on the techniques you employed?" Sterling considered the question carefully before responding. "The specific techniques are less important than the principles behind them, my lord. Everything I did was based on reading Mr. Chen's intentions through his body language, then using his own energy and momentum to control the engagement." He gestured toward Marcus respectfully. "Mr. Chen's attacks were technically excellent, but Each one announced itself through subtle changes in his posture, breathing, and weight distribution. Once you can see these tells, you can position yourself to be where the attack won't be, or guide it in a direction that doesn't threaten you. A young noble called out from the crowd, "But surely that requires supernatural speed and reflexes?" Sterling shook his head. "Actually, it requires the opposite. When you can see an attack coming before it's fully committed, you need very little speed to avoid it. Most of the movement you saw was simply efficient positioning, not quick reflexes." Marcus found himself nodding as Sterling explained concepts that had become clear to him during the final round. The idea that superior technique could replace the need for superior physical attributes was revolutionary to his way of thinking. The Queen rose from her seat, commanding immediate attention from everyone present. "This has been most illuminating," she said. "Captain Sterling, your demonstration of restraint and teaching ability reflects well on the Royal Guard. Mr. Chen, your courage in requesting this demonstration and your gracious response to the outcome show admirable character." She paused, seeming to consider something. "I believe both of you have provided something valuable to everyone present today. We have seen that true martial mastery involves wisdom as much as physical skill, and that defeat can be more educational than victory when approached with the right attitude." The king stood as well. "Indeed. Captain Sterling, please see that a full report of today's demonstration is provided to the other members of the Royal Guard. The teaching methods you employed today may benefit their training." Sterling bowed. "Of course, Your Majesty." The king then turned his attention to Marcus. "Mr. Chen, your request for this demonstration was granted because of your proven skill and dedication to martial arts. Today you have shown that you possess something equally important: the humility to learn from defeat and the wisdom to recognize superior knowledge when you encounter it." Marcus bowed deeply, unsure where the king's words were leading, but honored by the positive assessment. "Therefore," the king continued, "I am extending an invitation for you to train with the Royal Guard for a period of 3 months, should you choose to accept. Captain Sterling will oversee your instruction personally." A collective gasp arose from the crowd. Such invitations were virtually unheard of. The Royal Guard trained in secret, and their techniques were closely guarded knowledge, passed down through generations. For an outsider to be offered access to their training was unprecedented. Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle. 3 months of training with Captain Sterling and the Royal Guard was an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams. It would mean leaving his job, his regular training, and his comfortable life for an intense period of learning unlike anything he had ever experienced. Marcus began, then stopped. He looked at Sterling, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Your Majesty, I would be deeply honored to accept such an opportunity." The king smiled. "Excellent. Captain Sterling, please make the necessary arrangements." As the royal family prepared to depart, the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excited conversation about what they had witnessed. Many approached Marcus to congratulate him on his opportunity, while others sought out Sterling to ask questions about the techniques they had observed. Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers and curious spectators, but his eyes kept returning to Sterling, who was patiently answering questions from a group of young nobles. The captain's calm demeanor and thoughtful responses were exactly what Marcus had experienced during their demonstration: complete presence and focused attention on whoever he was interacting with. As the courtyard gradually emptied, Marcus made his way over to Sterling. The captain finished his conversation with the nobles and turned to face the young fighter. "Congratulations on your invitation," Sterling said with a warm smile. "I think you'll find the next 3 months quite challenging." Marcus grinned, feeling excitement building in his chest. "I'm ready for whatever you have to teach me." Sterling's eyes twinkled with something that might have been amusement. "We'll see about that, Mr. Chen. We'll see about that." 3 days later, Marcus stood before the gates of the Royal Guard training compound, a leather bag containing his few belongings slung over his shoulder. The morning mist hung low over the ancient stone buildings, giving the entire complex an otherworldly appearance. He had arrived early, partly from eagerness and partly from nervousness about what lay ahead. The compound was unlike any training facility Marcus had ever seen. Instead of modern gymnasiums with mirrors and equipment, the Royal Guard trained in courtyards and halls that had been used for the same purpose for centuries. The stones beneath his feet were worn smooth by generations of warriors practicing their craft. Captain Sterling appeared from a side entrance, dressed in simple training, clothes similar to what he had worn during their demonstration. His appearance was exactly the same, calm, controlled, and radiating that quiet confidence Marcus had found so intimidating. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," Sterling said with a slight smile. "I trust you've made the necessary arrangements for your extended absence from your regular life?" Marcus nodded. "I took a leave of absence from my job and arranged for someone to look after my apartment. My instructor at the dojo wasn't entirely happy about losing me for 3 months, but he understood. The opportunity. And your family?" "My parents think I'm crazy," Marcus admitted with a laugh. "But they're proud that I was invited. My father especially. He served in the military when he was young and has great respect for the Royal Guard." Sterling led Marcus through a series of corridors lined with portraits of former Guard members. Each painting showed a different era of uniforms and weapons, but all the faces shared similar qualities: alert eyes, strong postures, and an unmistakable sense of discipline and purpose. "The Royal Guard has existed in various forms for over 400 years, Sterling explained as they walked. "The specific techniques and traditions have evolved, but the core principles remain the same. We exist to protect the royal family and to represent the kingdom's commitment to excellence in all things." They emerged into a large courtyard, where a dozen men and women were already engaged in training. Marcus watched in fascination as they moved through exercises that seemed to combine meditation, martial arts, and dance into fluid, continuous motions. Their movements were precise and coordinated, creating patterns that were beautiful to observe. "Your fellow trainees," Sterling said, gesturing toward the group. "All members of the Royal Guard continue learning throughout their careers. Some have been here for 20 years, others for only 2. You'll train alongside all of them." One of the younger guards broke away from the group and approached them. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with short dark hair and the same alert, controlled demeanor Marcus was beginning to recognize as characteristic of the Guard. "Mr. Chen," Sterling said, "this is Guard Lieutenant Sarah Morrison. She'll be assisting with your initial orientation and training." Lieutenant Morrison offered a respectful nod. "Welcome to the compound, Mr. Chen. I watched your demonstration with Captain Sterling. Your willingness to adapt and learn was impressive." Marcus felt heat in his cheeks. "Thank you, but I think impressive might be generous. I spent most of the time looking foolish." "That's where you're wrong," Morrison replied seriously. "Anyone can look skilled when they're winning. It takes real character to maintain dignity, and openness to learning when you're being completely outmatched. That's why you're here." Sterling gestured for Marcus to join the group of training guards. "Your first lesson begins now. We'll start with the foundation of everything we do, learning to see without looking and to understand without thinking." Marcus wasn't sure what that meant, but he followed Sterling into the center of the courtyard. The other guards formed, a loose circle around them, creating a sense of focused attention without pressure. "Close your eyes," Sterling instructed. Marcus complied, though he felt slightly foolish standing with his eyes closed in front of a group of elite warriors. "Now," Sterling's voice continued, "tell me what you can observe about your surroundings without using your sight." This seemed like an impossible task, but Marcus tried to focus. Gradually, he became aware of sounds he hadn't noticed before. The whisper of clothing as the guards breathed, the distant sound of birds, the subtle creaking of the old buildings around them. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his face and the cool touch of the morning air. "There are 12 people around us," Marcus said slowly. "The wind is coming from the west. Someone is wearing leather boots that creak slightly when they shift. Their weight." "Good," Sterling said approvingly. "What else?" Marcus concentrated harder. "You're standing about 6 feet to my right. Your breathing is very steady and calm. Lieutenant Morrison is behind me and to the left. I can smell her soap. Or shampoo." He heard quiet murmurs of approval from the surrounding guards. When Sterling told him to open his eyes, Marcus found that his spatial awareness had been remarkably accurate. "This is the foundation of advanced combat awareness," Sterling explained. "In our demonstration, I wasn't watching your hands or feet to anticipate your attacks. I was reading your entire presence, your breathing, your balance, your intentions as they formed in your body and mind." Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. "Most fighters rely almost entirely on their vision, which means they—" 3 months later, Marcus stood once again in the palace courtyard, but everything had changed. The young man who had challenged Captain Sterling with aggressive combinations and burning ambition was gone. In his place stood someone who moved, with quiet confidence, whose eyes held the same alert calmness Marcus had first admired in the Royal Guard. The final demonstration had been the king's idea. Word of Marcus's progress had reached the royal family through Sterling's weekly reports, and they were curious to see how the young fighter had developed during his time with the Guard. Unlike his first demonstration, this one would be private. Only the royal family, a few trusted advisors, and the core members of the Royal Guard would be present. Marcus felt nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness than before. 3 months ago, he had been anxious about proving himself, about winning or losing. Today, he was simply curious about what would happen when he and Sterling worked together again. The outcome mattered far less than the process of exploration. They would share. Sterling approached wearing the same simple training clothes he had worn during their first encounter. His demeanor was exactly the same, calm, respectful, and radiating that quiet confidence Marcus now understood came from complete presence in the moment. "How do you feel?" Sterling asked as they met in the center of the courtyard. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Different," he said finally, "like I'm about to have a conversation instead of a fight." Sterling smiled approvingly. "That's an excellent way to think about it. Today, we're not demonstrating combat techniques. We're exploring the possibilities of movement and awareness together." The king and queen took their seats on the royal balcony, joined by several advisors, including Lord Chancellor Westbrook. The members of the Royal Guard arranged themselves around the edges of the courtyard, creating a circle of focused attention without pressure. Unlike 3 months ago, there was no herald to announce rules or time limits. This demonstration would flow according to its own natural rhythm, ending when both participants felt they had explored what they came to explore. Marcus bowed to Sterling, who returned the gesture with obvious respect. Then, without any formal signal to begin, they started moving. The difference was immediately apparent to everyone watching. Where Marcus's first demonstration had been a one-sided display of Sterling's mastery, this interaction flowed like a carefully choreographed dance. Marcus moved with the same fluid awareness he had observed in the Royal Guard, reading Sterling's intentions and responding with precise, economical movements. When Sterling shifted forward, Marcus moved to complement the action rather than oppose it. When Marcus initiated a technique, Sterling joined with the movement and guided it into beautiful flowing patterns. They were no longer opponent and master, but partners in an exploration of martial principles. The crowd watched in fascination as the two men wove complex patterns of movement that seemed to follow natural laws of balance and momentum. There were no wasted motions, no struggles for dominance, no attempts to prove superiority. Instead, there was a constant flow of give and take, with each participant contributing to movements that neither could have created alone. Lieutenant Morrison, watching from the edge of the courtyard, leaned toward Sergeant Brooks. "Look at his footwork," she whispered. 3 months ago, he was fighting the ground with every step. Now he's working with gravity and momentum like he's been doing it for years. Brooks nodded approvingly. "And watch his eyes. He's not tracking Sterling's hands anymore. He's reading his whole presence. That's something most people take years to develop." What amazed the observers most was how Marcus handled Sterling's legendary ability to control opponents through minimal contact. When Sterling placed a light hand on Marcus's wrist or shoulder, instead of being thrown off balance, Marcus flowed with the guidance and used it to transition into new movements. He had learned to work with Sterling's control rather than resist it. King Edmund leaned forward with obvious interest. "Remarkable," he murmured to the Queen. "The young man isn't just avoiding defeat. He's contributing to something beautiful." The demonstration continued for nearly 20 minutes, with both participants exploring increasingly subtle aspects of timing, distance, and awareness. They moved through what appeared to be combat techniques, but the violence had been completely transformed into art. Each attack became an invitation for creative response. Each defense became an opportunity for collaborative movement. Near the end, something extraordinary happened. For a brief moment, Marcus and Sterling moved in perfect synchronization, their awareness so aligned that they seemed to share the same intentions. They flowed through a complex sequence of movements, where it was impossible to tell who was leading and who was following. They had achieved what the Royal Guard called unified motion, the highest expression of martial collaboration. When they finally came to rest, both men were smiling. Marcus felt exhilarated but completely calm, as if he had just participated in a profound conversation conducted entirely through movement. The king rose from his seat and began to applaud, followed immediately by everyone else present. But this wasn't the polite acknowledgement of a well-executed performance. It was genuine appreciation for something they had never seen before. "Captain Sterling," the king called out, "that was extraordinary. But I find myself curious about Mr. Chen's perspective on what we just witnessed." All eyes turned to Marcus. 3 months ago, this moment would have terrified him. Now he felt completely comfortable sharing his honest observations. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, "3 months ago, I came here believing that martial arts was about proving strength and skill. Today I learned that it can be about creating something beautiful with another person. Captain Sterling and I weren't fighting each other. We were working together to explore possibilities that neither of us could have discovered alone." He paused, looking at Sterling with obvious gratitude. "The techniques I learned are valuable, but they're not the most important thing I gained here. I learned a completely different way of approaching conflict and challenge. Instead of trying to dominate or defeat opposition, I learned to work with it and find creative solutions." The Queen nodded approvingly. "And how do you think this new understanding might serve you in your life beyond martial arts?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her question. "I think it changes everything, Your Majesty. The principles work the same way in conversations, in problem-solving, in any situation where people have different goals or perspectives. Instead of fighting against obstacles or opposition, you can learn to work with them and find solutions that serve everyone involved." Lord Chancellor Westbrook spoke up from the royal balcony. "Young man, what you've described sounds very much like the diplomatic principles our kingdom strives to employ in international relations. The idea that opposing forces can be transformed into collaborative opportunities." Sterling stepped forward. "If I may, Your Majesty, Mr. Chen has demonstrated something remarkable during his time with us. He not only learned our techniques quickly, but he grasped the underlying principles and found ways to apply them that even surprised his instructors. His growth has been exceptional." The king considered this for a moment, then looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Chen, your original request was granted because you showed courage and skill. Today you have demonstrated wisdom and adaptability. Such qualities are rare and valuable. Marcus waited, sensing that the king had more to say. I am therefore extending an offer for you to join the Royal Guard permanently, should you choose to accept. Your unique background and perspective would bring valuable diversity to our ranks, and your dedication to learning suggests you would continue to grow and contribute significantly. Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle. To be offered permanent membership in the Royal Guard was beyond any dream he had ever entertained. It would mean dedicating his life to service, protecting the royal family, and continuing to develop the extraordinary skills he had barely begun to understand. He looked at Sterling, who gave him an encouraging nod, then at the other guard members around the courtyard. Their faces showed welcome and respect. He would be joining a community of people dedicated to excellence and continuous learning. Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, I would be deeply honored to accept such an offer. Serving as a member of the Royal Guard would allow me to continue learning while contributing to something greater than myself. The king smiled broadly. Excellent. Captain Sterling, please begin making the necessary arrangements for Mr. Chen's formal induction. As the royal family prepared to depart, Marcus found himself surrounded by his soon-to-be fellow guard members, all offering congratulations and welcome. The transformation was complete. The aggressive young fighter who had challenged the Royal Guard had become one of them. Sterling approached as the crowd began to disperse. Congratulations, Guard Initiate Chen. Your real training begins now. Marcus grinned, feeling excitement building in his chest about the years of learning and service that lay ahead. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Sterling's eyes held that familiar twinkle of amusement. We'll see about that. But somehow I think you'll do just fine, as they walked together toward the guard.